Hi there, and welcome to this month's edition of Real Estate Matters with Claire Gerton and myself, Ayse and Clare. This is a show about matters in real estate, that real estate matters and is important, how real estate affects us and our local communities and neighborhoods, and for some, real estate is the biggest investment. So both Claire and I are residential realtors here along the main line and surrounding areas. And right now we're in some really interesting times in the real estate market. And our goal is to bring you actual stories, scenarios, and some terms that may assist in residential real estate and perhaps a little bit of humor along the way. So thanks for being here, Claire.
Oh, Ayse, it's always fun to get together and do these. And each one we do, we see that it taps into more stories. As you're going through the market and the work we do, our daily in and out work, it's really interesting, isn't it, to see what we learn along the way and what's happening in the market is changing almost daily.
It can.
Yeah, it sure can. Yeah.
Sure can, yeah. And to keep up with it.
So today's topic that we've kind of pre-decided to explore and talk about is what happens once you're under contract. So your house is listed for sale, buyer makes an offer, terms are agreed upon, and we have a contract. And I think a lot of times the perception out there might be like, great, you just sit back, and you just come to the table and here's a check, here's the keys. Well, we know that is not the way it goes.
Does not quite work that way.
Conversely, it goes in the opposite way. There are many, many, many checklists for both buyer parties and seller parties that we as residential agents and commercial agents really stay on top of from the beginning of the contract, on executing the contract, signing it, all the way to the table. And we thought we could go through some of those today and tell a couple stories along the way on what we've seen and how those things go.
Yeah, that'd be really fun.
Okay. All right. So first thing happens is once you sign a contract, things start moving pretty quickly. If you're on the buy side, if you're a buyer, your agent starts to order title insurance and inspections oftentimes, and the ball starts rolling at that point.
Sure does.
So one of the first things that we can talk about, I'd say, is inspections, right?
I think so.
There are some typical ones that we pretty much see most commonly, like a home inspection, which would be all the systems and the roof and the plumbing, etc. And then, wood insects is common, and radon levels. And then we also have some not so common ones, but ones that we're seeing a lot more, like flood insurance and stucco inspections, septic tanks, mold, mildew, etc.
Well, inspections. Yeah.
So are you, talk to me a little bit about what are you seeing most right now in inspections if they are being elected? Now let's start there.
Yeah, that's where I was going to start. And, a handful of contracts right now are coming where there's inspections are waived.
Right.
And maybe that's because there was a pre-listing inspection done perhaps by the seller that's then made available, that report is then made available for the buyer side. And sometimes there's no pre-listing inspection done or performed on the property, and buyers, to stay competitive, are waiving those inspections. Mm-hmm. So I'd say right about now, maybe it's about 50-50.
I would agree. I'm seeing a lot more than I was in the spring.
Yeah. And a lot more being waived?
No, a lot more being elected.
Okay.
So, things are starting to, I think, there's some learning there. If you waive inspections and then you get in there and find that there are things that need to be addressed, I think now we're seeing a little bit more of elections.
That could be a whole nother show.
Yes, that could be. All right. So tell me something, an interesting story that goes along with one of your more recent inspections.
Yeah, I mean, ones that we're seeing often are the typical, as you mentioned, the property inspection covering basic systems in the home, the radon inspection in our geographic area of
Delaware County, Chester County.
I would even say the the whole United States, it tends to be on a higher level if you're kind of looking at that landscape. So often I'm just prepared for, you know, possible radon mitigation system, what have you. But those tend to be common. We're seeing a lot more of stucco inspections or moisture inspections that people like to call them. And, you know, they can be a bit grandiose from the cost as well as remediation. Not very common in Delaware County, but in Chester County, we have more septic systems and well systems. So getting those checked out, they're a major, piece of a property. Without those, the property really isn't functioning. So I would say they're really important, monumental. And some of these things on a seller side, you can kind of troubleshoot prior to even listing home. And I know that's a whole nother topic.
So just for example, so if you have a septic tank, you might as a seller, before you put your house on the market, say, let's get that inspected, and here's what we know about it today. So to reduce fears, because oftentimes fears, as we know, come around unknowns. So some people have never actually lived in a home that had a septic tank.
And we see that often. And often with septic and stucco, I find anytime a home seller can jump on that ahead of time, it's
Makes
best.
sense.
Is from a fear factor or a stigma factor, but also from the factor of time. Time isn't on our side when those systems or those pieces need to be, some attention need to be had. We're talking due to weather. You know, I think a septic system, or if you need to tear off stucco and redo stucco in the wintertime, that just doesn't work. Or in the wintertime with septic, the ground is frozen. So being preventative, if that's the word I'm looking for, aids in a lot of this moving smoothly from under contract to close.
That's a really good point. And it's something that we see often. And really mitigating fear, I find to be, and by doing that, is just information. What do we know? What do we know about it? So if you do have stucco moisture, or you do have moisture in the basement, you bring in you have a good word for it, a partner.
A strategic partner.
I like that word.
Yeah.
You bring in strategic partners to help you get that information clearly presented to both buyer and seller, to help with some of those negotiations that happen during those inspection contingencies. True?
Yeah, absolutely. And inspection contingencies typically might take place anywhere from 5 days after accepted contract to maybe 20 days and anywhere in between. I'm not saying anything out of that does not happen, but that's, I would say, rather typical.
And the standard is 10 days to...
Contract standard says 10, and you can amend that either way.
And 5 to negotiate, and then 2 to
wrap it up.
And
pretty
sign
much.
And say, we're moving forward.
Okay. And that's, you know, that process, the inspection and negotiation process, is very typical of many, you know, residential real estate transactions. And so...
Do you think it's important to go through that piece?
It very well can be. I understand the strategic part of waiving those.
I do. Okay.
And then I understand the strategic part of having those inspections, especially if the buyer might be a first-time home buyer.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and or just someone, typically a buyer's never been in that home, understanding how all the systems work, because then it's not universal throughout every home, how to turn on the heater or how to service the heater. They all vary from...
So even if there's nothing wrong or broken, even just to get acquainted with the systems and how
well said.
How the home functions. I mean, you use the word functionality, and I think that's really important. It's not just, it has a pretty tree in the backyard, or it has a great place.
Which is really important too.
That is important, but that it gives some knowledge of the actual property. And so I hadn't been really thinking about it that way, but I think that's important to point out.
And let's think about, as you know, when a buyer conducts their inspection. So we're under the assumption the contract or agreement of sale has elected inspections. So as a home seller, you want to, before people are coming in, you want to ensure that when the buyers and inspectors are coming in, that the home looks just as if you were getting it ready for photos or getting ready for a private showing. You know, lights on, clean as a whistle, accessibility to certain systems in the basement or the garage, right? And we also want to be cognizant of the buyer's choices after the inspections are done. If you want to share a little bit about what their choices are in the agreement of sale.
Exactly. So, and what are the buyer's choices?
Yes.
Yeah, they can say, so if like a roof needs attention.
Exactly.
They could say, well, you know, okay, there's a couple outlets that are not working, but we're going to focus on kind of the bigger things.
Sure, the bigger things, and that would be the negotiating piece, right? Negotiating between, hey, seller, could you take care of a couple of these items, or credit for a couple of these items, or, you know, so negotiating is the one big piece that most often that's what happens after inspections.
Right.
But the buyer could also say, now that I'm thinking about this, I'm having second thoughts.
Right. Yeah. And
in that case, they could terminate.
Yeah.
And they have that right built right into the contract right then and there.
So while you're talking about that, so if a buyer and a couple big things come up, I'm thinking of one that I had where a roof was at the end of its useful life. And the seller knew but didn't know until they had the inspections and the roof, they really had a roofer come out and give some more information. And the buyer, it became a little bit of a sticking point, and we ended up negotiating that. And when the seller understood that it may have been the thing that made the buyer no longer want to buy that house, helped negotiate a little bit closer to a middle place where they ended up giving a credit towards that. And I found that to be a great way of helping other buyers and sellers, is to say, listen, if you can find a place that you both win, you're getting some credit towards a new roof that needs to be, and you're still keeping this deal together.
Exactly.
Can you think of times when that's happened?
Well, to that point, really all that matters in that situation is how the buyer feels and how the seller feels. It really has no determination. It really doesn't matter what any other person's opinion is at that point in time. If something really is small items,
like a leaky faucet.
Sure, super easy to fix, as you know.
Right.
Nothing to be screaming about.
Loose lights, things.
But at the end of the day, it matters to the buyer, the one paying the money, and to the seller, the one potentially selling the home.
Right.
And some thoughts are, well, it has to be done. It's part of the home's functioning. Well, it doesn't have to be done by anyone's standards except the buyer and sellers.
Correct. So now that you bring up a fantastic thought, is that the buyer and the seller are actually brought together by their representation, their agents. So I find that what you're saying, or I'm wondering if you're saying this, is speak to me a little bit about how agents can work together to find that point.
I love it.
That point where both buyers and sellers agree. As
we talked about, you mentioned the word strategic partner. Oftentimes we're going to then rely on that strategic partner, who might be a general contractor, a roofer, an electrician, a plumber, that stucco expert, the mold expert, what have you. And having ties with those partners in our profession is paramount in my mind.
Right, a speed dial.
Speed dial, yes.
I have mine, yes.
To assess, okay, this is our situation, professional. What does it look like for my client? What does it look like for, the seller, perhaps, depending what side you're on?
Right.
Let's talk some actual numbers. Right. And those actual numbers can be shared by the contractor for purposes of a credit, or purposes of getting it done, and or purposes of what's our time frame to correct this look like.
Right.
And those strategic partners who are reliable, who are fair, are going to be your best buddies in this type of situation.
Absolutely.
If you're working with a a fellow realtor on the other side, right? Whether the buyer's agent or the seller's agent. Sometimes they might not have all their strategic partners lined up, or one of their strategic partners has left the business, retired from the business. You can cooperate together and say, hey, who do you know?
Right.
Who can we get out here pretty swiftly?
Right. I have to say, I have found my most favorite transactions to work on has been when the agent for the other party has called me and said, hey, I know a great mold guy. Let's get them in here. And they were the listing side. So that was super helpful. And it really helped my buyer as well in that situation.
Absolutely. And I was thinking of a time where we were conducting inspections. It was a flue inspection. And during the inspection, by accident, the chimney inspector, knocked off a little cap or something. So it just broke off.
Right.
Could have been old, fine.
Right.
And then had said, oh, well, you get the homeowner to get somebody over here to get this fixed. Oh, we can do it. I'm sure you can.
Oh, so he broke it in servicing for, like, doing inspecting for your buyer.
No fault of his own.
Just it happened. It was an accident.
Absolutely.
But it wasn't really then the seller's. It shouldn't have been the seller's.
I didn't feel that way. And so I had alerted the listing agent as things were happening. Right. And he was quick to say, hey, I've got my strategic partner, Ralph, the chimney,
another chimney person.
Definitely. Right. After hearing what went down and who they thought should be paying for this repair, didn't sit well. So he got his guy, we got him out, boom, boom, for 1/4 of the price that this company said they would fix that item that got broken. And now that Ralph chimney expert is now my go-to, my new strategic partner.
So working together, you actually solved the problem.
Absolutely.
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
So besides inspections, it really take up a lot of the kind of the contract to close time. But then there are other things. The buyer is applying for oftentimes financing and mortgage and things that's a process in itself. You have to order appraisal. Some appraiser comes out. Appraises the property.
And to backtrack a little bit, as you know, the buyer, once they hand in their offer, typically is aligned with a lender.
Right.
However, sometimes we know there's a period of time in the contract that allows them to potentially shop for a lender.
Oh, yes.
And we don't want that shopping process to last too long. No. Sometimes that could be something they could do ahead of time, but often don't think about it because interest rates fluctuate. But being prepared to choose a lender that's aligned with, fee program that they're okay with and interest rate loan program. So having like a tight process or a tight time frame for that is somewhat imperative to be able to have all of the other mortgage pieces move along in a timely manner.
Absolutely. And I can't say enough about, working with a lender, having buyers as a strategic partner as well, working with a lender who's going to be accessible on all those pieces, because that helps move it along as well. Their know-how and their expertise is super helpful.
Yeah, and just having that alignment with a strategic partner in the mortgage, oftentimes if we get something from another mortgage company we've never worked with, we will have our mortgage consultant review.
Yes.
If we're like, huge. Never heard of this, what in the world is this? Help us along. What are their, what's the mindset of that other lender? And so they can say, oh yeah, that's pretty much in line. Or I think you might, need to possibly have this buyer change lenders. They're really behind, or, something like that, to help with some guidance along the way.
I had a very similar experience like that. Not too long ago, I was representing the buyer and they ended up using a not local lender. So a national lender.
Which can be very appealing for buyers.
Very appealing, and I understood why. It was, economically it was a good idea. As it turned out that because of the not being local, not being somebody that knew everything that was happening right here in this market, ended up not being able to go to settle for a week later, which could have jeopardized the whole transaction. However, our local lender was able to help give some guidance, basically free of charge, just to, that was affiliated with the, the title and company, that just to keep things moving
and keep your relationship bonded.
Yes, and suggested ways on how to problem solve, and it really did help. And like your chimney guy, I'm like, oh, now I'm going to be tapping you, because you're somebody who really came through to help this person.
And that's why those strategic partners are so important in finding the right one, right? One that will pitch in and help, even though there's no tie to the financial tie to the transaction.
It really was. I was so super grateful to have that experience, because I was at a loss because I had no ability to. It was almost like a faceless at the national level.
Sure.
There was no one really there to call and say, hey, can you help me troubleshoot this? So that is important. I agree with you.
I'm glad your local person could help you out with that.
Me too.
Yeah, and I know recently, moving on to another milestone in contract to close is insurance.
Along those same lines.
Yeah,
yes.
So why would you say insurance is another milestone in contract to close?
So insurance is important for the buyer to feel comfortable if there's anything that goes wrong, right? So if you have, and again, if something happens, let's just talk flood insurance. So say you need to make a claim. You have a lot of water, we're getting more and more water in the east. Then if you have a strategic partner that is insurance that can help you navigate that by being there on the phone, I think is super important as well.
Without a doubt. And I think about insurance because often home sellers fill out a form in Pennsylvania called the seller's disclosure.
Yeah.
On it says, have you made any claims? And I think that's such an overwhelming form. And so sometimes people don't think, oh, that's an insurance claim, I need to make a note. Once a property goes under contract, one of our local insurance consultants can help and say, oh yeah, there was a claim on a property. Right. This is why. Don't worry, it doesn't affect your premium moving forward. Just want to let you know. So I think that's called the clue report, and it can clue us in on maybe a little past experience of the property, let's say.
Do you recommend that to each of your buyers?
Not always. I mean, insurance, we always recommend a preferred vendor for insurance to help secure, over time, insurance can just tend to tick up. So to maybe garner a quote that's maybe more in line with today's standards, but also kind of do a clue report on the property at no cost. At no cost. And sometimes a seller's past actions or past occurrences on a home could affect the buyer's premium moving forward.
Sure.
Yeah, and so that's part of that under contract to close process that kind of jumps up. So let's say you're working with a home seller. It's not a bad idea to just maybe have your preferred, your strategic partner run a quick report to make sure, okay, yeah, everything is squared away. We won't run into an issue later.
I had an experience, a transaction where the buyer, I also was representing the buyer at the time, was buying an estate. And the seller's disclosure had nothing on it because it was the grown-up children. And there was some indication that maybe it was a condo in a building, that there may have been some water damage, and that there may have been an insurance claim. But the power of attorney, they didn't know. They had no idea. And they ran a clue report and they got the wrong information on a different unit.
Oh.
So it almost fell apart because the buyer was like, well, there was a claim, and
you were able to clear that.
Well, with some effort. So again, that's where the having a great insurance agent, I said, let's find out. And the buyer was fearful that perhaps the sellers, even though they were power of attorney, were keeping something from them because there was nothing on the seller's disclosure. And that wasn't the case. But you can see how sometimes people go down these false information holes, rabbit holes, and it takes a really good professional to help
bring it back in
and say no, there really wasn't. This wasn't the case here. So I found that to be helpful.
I'm glad that worked out.
Me too.
Yeah.
All right, we're getting around all over the place here. But,
one other item under the contract to close is, and in not all areas we have it, is the use and occupancy inspection. In Radnor, we have it. In Tredyffr and Easttown, we don't have it. For the most part, I'll say. Sometimes, unless there's septic, that might have another layer, we'll call it. But each municipality in Delaware County, Chester County, differ as to what the township's going to look for. And that's an inspection that often happens, a little bit farther down the channel of home selling. We as a team, we like to get it ordered as soon as we can.
Yes.
But sometimes there can be, little delays on the township side or weather-wise. But that can throw a crink into...
At the end of the transaction, sure. A clarification, Ayse, that I think that we should make is that the use and occupancy is not an elected inspection. It's something that goes with the township. So every township requires something different.
Thank you.
That's what you were trying to say?
Yeah, thank you for clarifying. It's a must do.
It's a must do. So sometimes it gets forgotten what needs to be done. So in Radnor, and I know Tredyffr's different, they don't really have one, do they?
No.
In Radnor, it is you need to have clear numbers on your house. The sump pump cannot be draining into the sewer. You need smoke detectors in all the rooms, and there was your sidewalks. They come out and check
sidewalks and curbing.
So that has to be inspected by the township representative and taken care of by the seller.
Typically by the seller.
Typically by the seller.
Unless otherwise negotiated.
Usually, I don't think I've never had one where you had to negotiate it, but if you've seen
it's a one-off. It's usually if it's an as-is sale, or if you're attempting to, be very strategic about your offer and want to take that on.
Right. Okay, like with transfer tax.
Yeah, exactly.
So all of these things, we actually have to wrap this up today, unbelievably, but all of these milestones, if you will, in the contract are really, it doesn't happen just overnight. We really do spend a lot of time.
We do. It's a process. And, I think as we were talking, we both noted that, our checklists are like this long, depending on, I should say, regardless of what side we're working on, buyer side or seller side. We also mentioned that sometimes just because we're working on maybe our buyer's milestones, it doesn't mean we're not checking on the seller's use and occupancy inspection. Because to have that done is a really big piece of the sale, and for the buyer to feel comfortable moving forward. So often, even though we might be representing an opposite side, we still feel the onus.
Yes.
On behalf of our clients.
Yes, to work through both sides of what needs to get accomplished. And
absolutely.
So would you say that's the best advice that we could give to buyers?
I like that.
To buyers and sellers to say, let's make sure we know exactly what's happening for both parties and to get us to the table smoothly.
Yeah, for sure. Keep that open communication, and it's okay to say, oh, hey, did you do? No problem in checking up on things. I don't feel like that's micromanaging. I feel like that's representing,
and I appreciate it coming my way.
Yeah.
Hey, have you made that appointment? Is there, has that contractor come out? It's helpful to me.
Absolutely, without a doubt. And I did want to quickly, I know we're wrapping up in a little bit, but add in a title in there, because that's so important. And for some people, that's such a foreign concept, the title insurance. And that's just to ensure there's no past liens on the home that will pass to that new buyer.
Right.
And a quick hurdle around that is, in the state of Pennsylvania, liens will crop up or could crop up on title. Some can be closed out, but sometimes they're still left on title that we have to kind of dig deep and to remove from title.
And liens meaning like some taxes weren't paid.
Unpaid taxes, late taxes.
Child support.
Child support in Pennsylvania is a big one. There can be no unpaid child support for seller or buyer.
So when you purchase title insurance, that is what helps clear all of that to make sure that you're buying a clean clear and free title.
Yeah, I mean, of course, on the day of closing, most people are going to encumber that title by putting their mortgage on the property, but make sure that the liens that are on there are from you and no one else along the way.
I like it. So here now that takes us to settlement, and we're going to need another show to talk about.
I love it.
With settlement day. So thank you so much for this episode, and until our next one.
Always a pleasure.
Oh, mine too.
Thanks, Claire.
Thanks, Ayse.